Welcome to Tony Martignetti Nonprofit Radio coverage of the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning, hosted by the Partnership for Philanthropic Planning. We're in San Antonio, Texas. My guest now is Alan Breus, principal of the Breus Group in Escondido, California. His conference topic is non-cash gifts, the treasures in your donor's attic. Alan Breus, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you. Most gifts are cash or stock. Why are we interested in other non-cash gifts like collectibles and things?
I suppose the issue today is that cash is not quite as available as it used to be. In reality, I guess it was in '08 or '09, a total of 148,000 pieces were donated by taxpayers for a total of $1.22 billion. An average gift of roughly $8,300, which is not a bad pull. Okay. So I don't think there's much of a change. It's just that there's a new focus because of the fact that money is more difficult to come by.
Yeah, but these gifts of non-cash sort of collections can be difficult to value, difficult for the institution to manage. And we'll talk in some detail, but
surely.
So how do we overcome the objections that people are going to that small and mid-sized shops, because that's the audience is small and mid-sized nonprofits, that they would have to managing a collection like this and taking in the gift?
Well, in most cases, I suppose the gift is sold, so it becomes a non-related gift. With the larger groups, a hospital, a museum, a university, those are most of the groups that I deal with. They'll hang the painting, or they'll display the collection.
All right.
When it's non-related, or even if it's just inappropriate to maintain, they'll sell it. At which point, the donor gets his cost basis as the deduction rather than the fair market value.
Yeah, there is a lowering of the donor's deduction.
That is true. But again, fine art, forms of collectibles, if they're maintained for a period of at least 3 years without being sold, and there's an understanding that the purchase or the donation was given based on the fact that they were going to really hold on to it, the donation is the fair market value, unless it's a life insurance policy, where then it's either the fair market value, which is the cash value, or their basic cost, whichever is less.
Okay. So your work includes life insurance
Yes,
gifts
it
then?
does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
I was thinking more tangible collections.
No, tangible art and tangible fine art. I do film. I've done that for the Holocaust Museum. It's a very eclectic marketplace.
Okay. Well, since it's so eclectic, let's try to identify how a nonprofit can spot the right prospect for these types of gifts. How does talking about identifying? How does the nonprofit identify someone as a potential donor of one of these non-cash assets?
I guess the best answer is when they're developing their relationship with the donor. Most cases, the focus is on his desk, which is where the checkbook is. In my world, you become a little bit Sherlockian. You look on the walls, you look on the table. I think people would be shocked to find items that people have owned or do own over the years that have great value. The approach then, I suppose, the approach I suggest anyway, is if you have a relationship with an appraiser or a collector, and they are willing, I know most appraisers are, to take and look at a photograph, a digital photograph, and give the group an idea. Is it worth pursuing?
Okay. And then suppose it is. We get an initial yes, looks like it could have some value. What's the next step for the charity?
In my world, the next step is to approach the individual with that kind of material that says, I am donating, I am giving.
Oh, okay.
It's just that easy.
Okay, before we get to that step, though, how do we talk to the donor about parting with their collection? Now, your seminar description says this explicitly, that the donor has spent probably a lifetime or a good many years creating this collection. How do we get them to consider parting with it?
Well, I'll give you an instance. One now that I'm dealing with, one of the universities was given a collection of Lincoln material. Beautiful, beautiful. I think 14 documents signed by Lincoln or Seward, people of the civil rights.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Civil War
Yeah.
era, and he had loaned it to the university merely for them to use in some research work. After he loaned it, he spoke to his family, and they said, "You know, we're not going to hold on to this. We're going to either stick it somewhere in the library, Dad, or we're going to sell it off piecemeal." Being in a position where he's going to leave his family more than well cared for, his decision was very immediate. I want this to be together. I want this to stay. I want it to be valuable, and I want people to enjoy it. So he quickly donated a few $100,000 worth of documents to the university with no feeling of remorse.
All right. So the example there is the family doesn't think as much of the collection as the donor does. I mean, it's not as valuable to them as it is to their dad.
Very
Right. Okay.
rarely, very rarely. I mean, you're spending all this time, your vacations, your friendships, so much of your life, in many instances, revolves around the joy of collecting. The thought of having it disappear. I'll give you one instance where it may sound sort of silly to people, but a friend of mine, an appraiser, appraised a collection of Pez dispensers.
Okay.
$125,000.
Is that right?
Yes.
For Pez.
Pez,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. How many pieces in
No
that
candy,
collection?
no candy.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Oh.
He was telling me about it. He did it. It was
were there the
years ago.
clown heads? The clowns
Yes,
were
all
my
of them.
favorite.
Well-
well then, so I would see value in that collection as long as it had the clown.
Okay.
The others would just be gravy for me, but I like those little clown heads. I remember those. And no candy, you said. Yeah,
No candy.
that's
No
not-
candy.
Okay, so most families don't appreciate the collection the way the collector did, their relative did. We should be also talking to the donor about tax advantages of making this kind of gift.
I think, of course, you've hit on it. In today's world, cash flow is very important. If a Chagall is sitting on the wall, it's worth $250,000, and the donor can be noted that that's on the wall, and you pass it every day, and you don't think about it. The tax deduction of $250,000 will free up $100 and some odd thousand worth of income tax that you would have had to have paid. Mm-hmm. This has got to add to your cash flow. It's got to be more valuable to you. If you want to sell the painting, on the other hand, you're only going to end up getting about 50% of its fair market value. At any auction...
And explain why that is for listeners.
Surely. At an auction... the seller's price, his cost, his commission, his fee, is usually about 25%.
All right.
Then you've got to figure that there's 28% capital gains tax,
right,
depending, of course, on when you bought it. Then there's shipping, and there's insurance, and then there's estate tax. In most instances, $250,000 painting yields to the owner about $125,000. That's about what he's going to get in terms of tax savings, and he also enjoys the fact that he's donated to one of his favorite charities.
All right. Now, we're talking about pretty expensive collection types, the $125,000 Pez. I know that was a friend, that was an appraiser friend of yours, not a charitable gift. I realize that, but I can't get those clowns out of my head. The Chagall, but there could be a $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 collection or art piece that a smaller charity might be likely to be offered, right?
It means the same thing.
Yeah.
A $25,000 or $30,000 deduction is still $15,000 of cash flow, additional cash flow in somebody's pocket. And again, as you age, I'm afraid most of the donors that I've noted who do this are a little older. They're at a point where they would like the piece not to just be abused or the collection to be abused, which unfortunately does happen. I'm working on a collection now of Impressionist art that is falling apart.
Yeah.
Literally, the oils, of course, the Impressionist era was almost 100 years ago. The art has been kept in a home in Southern California, and it's depreciating and deteriorating, and it's unfortunate.
Let me ask you, what type of help does a charity need professionally if they're now embarking on this in this conversation with a donor? What advisors does the charity need?
Good question. I'm thinking, of course, of dealing with the accountant from a tax perspective.
Okay.
From my world, I'm usually brought in by the advisor or the plan giving officer.
Okay, and who else? All right, so an appraiser. Your business is appraising.
That's correct.
The charity needs an appraiser. Is that right?
Well, I think what they need is an advisor who understands the product. And yes, it's an appraiser. Now, the charity does not pay for the appraisal. They don't want to be involved in that aspect, because if there's a question from the Internal Revenue Service standpoint, they fall into the chain of liability. So the appraisal is not nominated by them. They don't have really much to do with it. The appraiser, on the other hand, difference appraisal, appraiser. The appraiser may be a guide to suggest to anyone who says, for instance, to me, Alan, I've seen something in somebody's office. Here's a photograph. Here's an idea of what the item. Can you tell me whether it's worth pursuing? Would you then, as an appraiser, come with me to meet with the donor and give him an idea as to why and under what conditions this item can be placed in our offices?
Yeah.
This item, it's received properly.
Okay. And what should we be ensuring that the donor? What kind of advisors do we want to insist, or at least strongly recommend that the donor have, besides the appraiser, who's you said is not paid by the charity, so is paid by the donor? Does the donor need to be encouraged to have other advisors helping him or her?
I would think not. Most of the people who have these collections are fairly, a degree of their expertise is fairly strong.
Okay.
I don't think they have a view as to value. When you really have a problem is when somebody has inherited a collection and they have no idea. It's been in the house for years, and the advisor or from the charity happens to note it. Mm-hmm. And has sent me a photograph or sent me an idea. Alan, why don't we take a look at this? Are you willing to fly out? And I do occasionally. At that point, it becomes a little more difficult because it's Grandpa left me this. Grandma left me this. Recently, I came across a samovar, which is a Russian teapot, worth about $15,000, and
much less than the Pez dispensers.
Yeah.
I want to point that out.
Much less.
Yes, go ahead.
Much less, and it was one of these just shocking situations for the owner, because it was something that they actually made tea in.
Yeah.
Which nobody does anymore.
Right. Okay, that's an expensive cup of tea.
Yes.
I hope they were using those good, not those bag teas, but I hope they were using the loose teas.
There you go.
Good from Republic of Tea. I hope they were using those. Okay, so now we're back at the stage where we're giving the donor a document of gift. Is it a deed of gift? Is that what it is, or just a gift agreement generically?
I think generically it's a transfer. Okay. It's just
okay. So then the charity has to have someone have drafted that for them. So
an attorney,
maybe a board member who has expertise in these types of agreements.
Well, what you're leading into now, and this is for probably almost any size charity, they should have either a large or a small committee, depending on whether they're a large or a small charity. But there should be a committee, and there should be on that committee a professional, an attorney.
A committee of what type? For non-cash gifts, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Really?
To determine whether this is appropriate. There are some types of fine art pieces that are inappropriate.
And so who should be on this committee?
Well, that's the choice.
Let's say it's a mid-sized nonprofit. Maybe it could be a college, small college, which would be, in the big scheme of nonprofits, would be a mid-sized nonprofit. Maybe they have a committee that doesn't meet regularly, but a committee of advisors that when this type of opportunity arises, then the committee will convene.
Surely.
Who should be on that committee?
It really varies, but you're right. It meets usually 2 or 3 times a year, no more than that.
Okay, yeah.
And it's setting what is our mission? What kind of items do we feel comfortable owning and displaying, both in our office or even in our written material? Mapplethorpe would be hard to take in some areas.
Yeah, but the advisors who should be on the committee. So we should have an appraiser.
I think that,
right?
Well,
an attorney.
Yes.
Okay,
yes, certainly.
You mentioned accounting.
I would have an accountant as well.
Okay.
And I would have also 1 or 2 officers of the charity itself.
Okay. All right, so there's a nice committee of 4 or 5 people.
That's all it takes.
Any bigger than that, we'll never get anything done.
Exactly.
We all know committees. All right. We have we have about 3 minutes or so left. We've done the legal agreements.
Mm-hmm.
The item has physically been transferred, so now the charity is in possession of the item and or the collection.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that this is something you alluded to earlier: related versus unrelated.
Yes.
Let's say this is going to be something that is related to the charitable mission. And by the way, for listeners, that's a legal determination that your legal advisor would have to make, whether this falls within the related use rule of the Internal Revenue Code or not. So we're just going to skip over that issue because it's very technical and it's very fact sensitive. Really depends on what the collection is and what the purpose of the charity is
true.
and how the charity tends to use it. Yeah. So I don't mean to take over.
No, go right ahead.
I want to get past this, but I do want listeners to know that it is important to the discussion because, as Alan said, it impacts the donor's deduction. It also impacts forms that the charity may have to fill out. So this related use rule is something that your legal counsel needs to determine whether you fall within it or not. We're going to gloss over that and say that the council has determined that it does fall within the charitable mission. It satisfies the related use rule. The charity is going to keep it and use it for their mission. How do we now steward the donor? How do we make sure our newly received art is appropriately insured, humidity controlled, et cetera? How do we take care of all this?
Again, that's usually on the shoulders of the committee members.
Okay.
There is an awareness that an item will deteriorate. The collector, the donor, he will be pretty clear, since he is hoping that this is going to maintain or be maintained in a good condition. The only other area, though, that I think is important is when it's unrelated, and the only reason I'm mentioning that is one of the donation prompts to someone is, on an unrelated item, you can turn that into a charitable remainder annuity trust.
Okay, we're getting too technical.
Okay, maybe somebody in the audience will understand.
We only have a couple minutes left.
Okay.
All right, so your advice is that the donor will be pretty clear about how this collection or piece needs to be protected and preserved? Is that right?
I think I mean, after all the years of collecting and their view of the item, of course, once it's transferred, they have no further, nothing, absolutely no control.
They've given it up, right. But they can be a very good source of information.
I would think so, yes.
Okay. We have to leave it there, Alan Breus. Alan Breus is a principal of the Breus Group, and by the way, his last name is spelled Breus. He's a Pez lover, and his conference topic was non-cash gifts, the treasures in your donor's attic. Alan Breus, thank you very much for being a guest.
Thank you, sir.
Been a privilege to have you. This is Tony Martignetti, Nonprofit Radio, coverage of the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning, hosted by the Partnership for Philanthropic Planning. We're coming to you from San Antonio, Texas.